So we've been learning a lot about lighting with lights. Makes sense, right? But you can actually light in CG using an image, a very specific type of image called HDRI. Now, HDRI stands for High Dynamic Range Image, and you can see an example of one right here. So you can see that basically what an HDRI is it's a panoramic image that kind of covers the entire field of your vision, and it's a 32-bit EXR file, which 32-bit EXR files can hold a lot more color, light, and luminance information from the real world that you can then use. You can use this image to light a scene in 3D. So you can use HDRIs to help you create more realistic lighting. So here's an example. Got another example right here of downtown LA on a little helicopter pad. And then you don't need to just create real world photos to generate HDRIs. You can also create them in CG. So here you can see kind of like a little light box setup that was created and turned into an HDRI using some different methods. And so you can create stylized HDRIs, but all of them are just images with a lot of luminance and color information that, again, you can turn into luminance information, light information inside of 3D. And I will show you how to use these HDR images to illuminate your scene. So if we just jump into Cinema 4D here, you can see we got no lights in our scene, and we got our little school of motion controller here. And what we're gonna do is we are going to go and first create a dome light. Now this is just gonna be a massive dome that is gonna be in your scene that illuminates and actually generates a little bit of a light source. So I can turn the intensity up, and you can see that this is just a very flat light. I'm gonna bring that back down to an intensity of 1, but we can not only change the color here like we did before, we can actually load up an image texture in here, specifically an HDR image, and load that into the texture slot. So what we can do is go into the asset browser here. Let me just give myself a little bit of room over here. And we have a folder called HDRI. So if I just make this a little bit bigger, you can see all these different types of HDR images, all these EXRs. Now let's just choose this one for now. And I'm just gonna click and drag. Make sure I download it, because if you don't download your HDRI, you'll see there's this little download icon from the cloud icon. You'll wanna click that first, download it to your hard drive, and then you can go and you can click and drag, and you can just drop this image right into that texture slot. And I'll close this out, and you can see immediately that this image is using all the luminance information from this HDR image, and it is now lighting our model here. And you can see that, you know, the brighter spots back there, that window, that's almost being treated as if it were a real window that is actually illuminating the environment. And so it's almost as if this controller was in this little room with the little wastebasket there and all that kind of stuff. You can see as I rotate this dome light around, it's changing the light information. It's changing the shadows, which is really cool. And so you can see that lighting just from an HDRI doesn't look all that great, but if we had a very shiny sphere in here, for example, or very shiny out, let's get a shiny figure object here. Just bring this down, make it a little smaller. And do we have a metal material? Yes, we do. Let's turn off the controller here. You can see that actually with fully reflective objects, HDRIs are very helpful. You can see all the reflection of our HDRI image on our reflective little figure object here. So there are instances where just using an HDRI is very nice, because now when we rotate this around, you can see that the object kind of looks completely different because we rotated the environment it's in, and now we're having this object look a little bit darker because it's reflecting the darker parts of this environment or this HDRI. So with fully reflective objects, think about the only reason you can see a reflective object is that it's actually reflecting the environment it's in. So if you were in a black hole or a completely white space, the reflective object would just either look totally white or totally black. So yes, using HDRIs with very reflective objects is great, but I do not recommend them as your sole light source when rendering and lighting a object like this. There's two reasons for that. Number one is an HDRI gives you fixed lighting. So if you want to accentuate something very specific on your object, you're going to want to go in and actually create a light and light that specific part of your model. Because otherwise, again, you are just locked into the lighting that is baked into this image right there, and you can only rotate it around. Second thing, the light's coming from an infinite distance away. So remember how the closeness your light is to your object changes the shadows. You can even see that the shadows are, kind of soft from this HDRI image. And we can even go in and we can change the image here as well to maybe something a little bit more like lighter. So you can see we're even getting that bounce light, the color from the image, which is a little bit of like this kind of ugly green color. It's kind of bouncing. That color spill is happening there. And so if we go and we drag and drop in this HDRI image, you can see how it's very bright. It's kind of like creamy white, but the lighting is so flat. There's like no shadows at all. So what I recommend you do is just use an HDRI as either an ambient light or a fill light. So it's just going to be a very subtle light that is casting in your scene, okay? So that means bringing down the intensity quite a bit so that all it is kind of an ambient or a fill light. And what this allows you to do is it creates more realistic lighting, because if you think about a real world studio setup, the environment that you're in is not just going to be lights. It's going to be in a room. It might be in a warehouse. The ceiling might have some metal scaffolding. There might be boxes of equipment lying around on the floor. There's, of course, the floor, like a concrete floor. So adding an HDRI to your scene is actually very helpful. Now, what might not be very helpful is actually seeing the HDRI in the render view here. You can see that door, and this looks very odd. So to turn that off, just uncheck that background, and you'll just have that kind of ambient fill lighting. And then you can go in, add your area lights, and start lighting using traditional lighting methods that I showed you, and you kind of combine the best of both worlds. Okay, so that's kind of like a recap on HDRIs. What are they? How do you use them? You can use them in any 3D application, even Unreal Engine. You can use HDRIs. Something that I think is actually very helpful to use HDRIs for, and what you would actually want to keep the background on for, is if you have some kind of landscape and you want to add a sky. Okay, so let's just say we got the ground plane here, and we want to add a nice little sky. Like maybe this is a Xbox controller that's outside. Sorry, Soundbox controller outside. You can see how there are some HDR images that are just skies. So if I go in here, let's add this one. I have this one downloaded already. So I'll go, and with that dome light selected, I'll just drag and drop, replace that image in there. And so you can see this is kind of, let's actually increase the intensity there. It looks dark. You can see that, all right, if we put like a grass texture material on the floor, this looks like this is kind of, outside or something like that. Especially if we just kind of angle our camera up, you can only kind of see the sky. So HDRIs have a variety of use cases. You can use them as environment backgrounds that you actually render, like a sky, or you just use it as an ambient fill or just an ambient light that just adds a little bit more realism to your lighting setup, especially if you have very metallic objects. This is going to be a very key thing that you use to kind of sell the realism. I'll just bring a sphere in here real quick, apply that metallic material on there. And so you can see, let me just up the segments there. You can see, especially with metallic objects, you want that HDR in there, because even if you have that light coming from it fairly low, you can still see that environment reflected in there. So HDRI is very key to adding realistic lighting, but again, I'm gonna caution you to not ever use it as a sole light source. Again, unless it's a fully metallic object and the HDR just kind of looks perfect with your fully reflective object. But that being said, go out, have fun with your HDRIs. We're gonna provide a PDF for you that actually has a list of where you can actually find other HDR images on the interwebs. So go and check that out and have fun HDRIing.